to X and O this Super Bowl to death, which he's probably done 12 times over at this point.
Right.
It's a senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, who you can also find on the ESPN NFL Matchup show. And you guys are going to probably be doing a deep dive this weekend on the Matchup show, right, with the Super Bowl? How many ways have you sliced this, Greg? Like 17 ways?
Well, Chris, this is one of those games. The Super Bowl is always a game where we wish we could have an hour and a half, because a half-hour show on ESPN is 21 minutes, and that never feels quite enough for what you can talk about with the Super Bowl. And this one, I think, has so many really interesting elements to it.
Yeah, what's the most interesting to you? I mean, we all get caught up in the Mahomes Brady thing and all of that. What's the most interesting aspect of it for you?
Well, one of the most interesting to me will be the Chiefs defense versus that Bucs offense and Brady, because these teams played Week 12, and Spagnolo, the coordinator, was very aggressive with blitz, as he is against everybody. That was not unique to the Bucs Week 12, but he pressured a lot. He played snaps of cover zero. In fact, the first 2 third downs of the game for the Bucs offense, Spags came with zero blitz. I'm very anxious to see how that plays out, because, Brady, he's great. That's not my point. But Brady is not a second reaction quarterback. He will be in the pocket, and that's where he wins. Brady normally wins before the ball is snapped. So to me, that angle is one of the most intriguing in the Super Bowl.
How many, I don't mean to put you on the spot with this, Greg, but how much do you recall from the winning game plans that Spags put together in those Giants Super Bowls? And is there any value or merit to diving back into that a little bit on his behalf in facing Brady this time, granted with a much different roster?
Well, he was the coordinator in 2007, not in 2011. So he beat Brady once in 2007. And that was the Super Bowl that many people might recall, where he brought Justin Tuck inside to play defensive tackle and essentially rushed with 4. It was not a high percentage blitz game for Steve Spagnolo. And back then, bringing a defensive end inside to defensive tackle, which everybody does now, but back then in 2007, that was a little different. And as you guys probably recall, everybody said, oh, that's the NASCAR front. Well, everybody has a NASCAR front now. That's just part of the game. So I don't know if that means anything. Certainly the offense he was playing against with Brady and the Patriots is a different offense than he's facing now with Brady and the Bucs. It's a totally different offense in terms of concepts and philosophy.
What did we see in the first matchup that you think we either A, will never see in this matchup, or B, we will probably see a bunch more of? We saw what happened with Tyreek Hill in the first quarter of their first matchup.
Yeah.
Obviously, they
Adjusted.
Todd Bowles made some enormous adjustments. So, right?
Well,
so how do you think this is going to start?
We'll see Hill with 13 for 269, but
right.
And it seemed like he had all those numbers in about the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
There were third downs in that game. Not many, but there were third downs in that game in which Todd Bowles doubled both Hill and Kelsey. And as you know, Steve, you can double 2. You can't double more than 2 because you just don't have enough bodies. I wonder if Todd will take a look at the kinds of things that Bill Belichick has done over the last couple of years. I remember a game, I can't remember if it was a playoff game or a regular season game, where Belichick essentially doubled Hill on every play, and Hill only had 1 catch. But he did match up man-to-man on Kelsey, and if memory serves me, he did it with J.C. Jackson. Now, you have to feel comfortable if you're going to match up man-to-man on Kelsey with who that is. And when teams have 2 weeks, Steve, and you're very aware of this, sometimes teams do things differently than they did in the regular season. So, I don't have any inside information, but part of me thinks, hey, are there going to be snaps where he might double Hill and put Carlton Davis on Kelsey? Because Carlton Davis is a big corner who can match up to a Kelsey. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but we know that Todd Bowles will not do the same thing he did Week 12.
And then if in fact, doubles on Hill are part of the approach by the Bucs defense, we've seen the Chiefs kind of counter that by getting the ball in his hands in the backfield. Whether it's using, pre-snap motion and misdirection and then giving it to him on an end around, which we saw Mecole Hardman do against the Bills, not even Tyreek Hill, with great success. Is that like the counter punch that the Chiefs have in their arsenal to kind of still get Hill involved if, in fact, he gets neutralized on the passing routes?
And that's a great point, Chris, because you put him in the backfield or you put him in motion, and a lot of times he goes in motion, then return motion. He goes in these multiple motions on plays, and it's very hard to double a player doing that. Or if you're going to, you really have to declare it clearly before the snap of the ball, and that gives Mahomes pre-snap information, which is what you're always trying to get for your quarterback anyway. So that's a really good point. And Andy Reid's been doing this a long time. And my sense is this is their second consecutive trip to the Super Bowl. I think they're going to be very aggressive throwing it. I think they're going to feel that, hey, if we get ahead 14-0 or 17-3 and we make the Bucs totally one-dimensional, then that's where Spags' pressure schemes, that's even where the four-man pressures can be a factor. And there's another element to that, which we can get into in a moment. But I think that the Chiefs, having been there before now, I think they're going to be very aggressive offensively.
Have you seen coaching staffs come to this Super Bowl, if you can remember back, where they because of the 2-week lapse in between, do they kind of start to outsmart themselves? They start to cut this thing up as many ways as the media does, and they start to talk themselves out of some things? I know it's hard to get inside their minds, but
yeah,
some teams seem to show up absolutely confident that what they're going to run works, and then other teams show up and you just get a different sense about what they're going to do game plan.
Yeah, my sense would be that Andy Reid is past that, Steve.
Right.
He was in a Super Bowl in 2004 with the Eagles. He won it last year. He's coached a lot of playoff games. I think Andy does kind of interesting stuff just as part of what he does. So I don't think he's going to outsmart himself. Plus, and I don't know how much of a factor this is. You could certainly tell me more, having been involved in Super Bowl week and that whole thing. But they're in Kansas City. They're not in Tampa. This is not one of those weeks where they've got 100 commitments and they're all over the place. I mean, this to them is a normal week. When are they, Chris, do you know when they're even getting there? Either today or tomorrow, right?
Yeah, they show up tomorrow.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, the fact that they're not there probably helps them because it's just, in a sense, a normal week in Kansas City of going to practice.
Greg, I'm curious about the use of defensive backs in blitz packages this year. The Bills and Leslie Frazier had to turn to it because they were relatively ineffective rushing for this year. They couldn't get home. And so Leslie turned to his defensive backs to get there quicker. But we saw the Chiefs blitz Josh Allen with defensive backs to get there faster. And I'm wondering going forward, with all the offseason study that coaches around the league do and the copycat league that it is, do you think going forward that blitzing defensive backs will be a more popular tactic against not only Josh Allen but mobile quarterbacks in general?
There's two answers I would give to that. Number one, I think blitzing defensive backs can be a function of need, as with the Bills.
Right.
Some teams and coordinators like to rush for, and in an ideal world, if they can, they do. Others, it's a philosophy. They're going to do that regardless. Spagnolo is that kind of guy. But the second part of your question is, I think you'll see more of it for the simple reason that they're better athletes, and the quarterbacks that can move, you have a chance now with an athlete who's arguably better or just as good as a quarterback that can move, of getting home. So, yes, I do. I think you've been seeing that, Chris, more and more anyway. I think that's become part of the NFL. And the other reason you do it, too, is offensive linemen can't react to defensive backs very well because for obvious reasons. So, I think that is something that we will see more in the NFL.
Yeah. What do you think if there's a player under the radar, I mean, besides Mahomes or Kelsey or, Mahomes, Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, or Tom Brady, who's an under-the-radar, perhaps a defensive guy who could be the difference maker in this game that may be off the radar for most fans?
Well, I don't think he's off the radar, but I think Chris Jones is a big factor in this game. Obviously, there were some who thought he should have been the MVP a year ago. And the reason I mention that is because one thing that the Chiefs defense does really well, even when they rush four, and believe me, they don't blitz every play, is they will walk linebackers up on the line of scrimmage. They do that a lot when they're in nickel and dime, and they're in dime a lot. I think over 35% of their snaps this year, they've had 6 defensive backs on the field. And one thing they do is they'll walk their dime linebacker, who's normally Ben Neiman, up on the line of scrimmage. And what that does is it sets protection for the offense, and it creates one-on-ones for Chris Jones on offensive guards. And that's an area in which I think the Chiefs have a favorable matchup, Chris Jones working against the offensive guards for the Bucs.
Flipping it over to the Bucs defensive side of things, much has been said about Devin White and Levante David as coverage players. What is, and maybe we can go back to the first meeting as an example, how often were they used, if at all, in coverage on Kelce? And do they have the athleticism to at least turn to them some of the time as coverage options on Kelce? Are they athletic enough, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a big factor. I mean, David at times will match up to tight ends, White not too often. I'd be very surprised if you saw linebackers on Kelce very often in this game when the Bucs are in man coverage. And I think that's going to be an interesting element to this game because keep in mind, Kelce is very often a detached player. Mm-hmm. Yes, are there snaps in which he does line up on the line of scrimmage next to the tackle? Sure. But he's a detached player. And that's another element to this game. He's very often, and they run this formation more than any team in the league, he is very often the single receiver to the short side of the field on the backside of trips, on the backside of 3 wide receivers. And when they do that in the first matchup, the Bucs kept a corner on him. They kept one of their corners on him. So Kelce is not really a true line of scrimmage tight end. He's much more of a detached player.
What do you feel like the situation with Kansas City's offensive line, where both tackles are injured, Fisher's not going to be in there, and the Bucs, they've got some formidable guys on the defensive line. Do you think that could be the difference in this game, even more so than their first matchup?
They're going to have to dominate that matchup. Now, having said that, Mahomes is arguably the best second reaction improvisational quarterback in the game. But they do have a big advantage with JPP and Shaq Barrett. I believe it'll be Remmers at left tackle and Rankins at right tackle. And even with Sue and Vita Vea inside, I think they can control the inside to some degree. So that they have to win that matchup. Their D-line has to be dominant in this game. But of course, having said that, that doesn't mean that Mahomes won't make second reaction plays. I remember having a great conversation with Dean Pease this past summer, who's been in the league for years and years and just got rehired in Atlanta as the D coordinator. And he told me that when you play quarterbacks like Mahomes, there's two defensive plays. There's the first 2 seconds, and then there's what happens after the 2 seconds. So there's almost 2 separate defensive plays.
I wanted to kind of jump around the league a little bit, and I know not far from where you are, there are a lot of Philly reporters kind of keeping their ear to the ground on whether Carson Wentz could be moving, and it seems like the cap implications be damned. They're convinced that something is afoot. Les Bowen and guys like that, which I know you know very well. I guess my question to you, though, Greg, is Carson Wentz the kind of quarterback talent that would be a fit in just about any system? I guess what I'm asking is, there really isn't a system where you couldn't put him in and he could succeed for you, provided he recaptures the form that he had a few years ago?
Probably a fair statement. I think there's some systems that are better than others for him. I think at his core, he's much more of a guy who wants to push it down the field. I don't think he's one of those quick rhythm guys because he's long. Gangly's not the right word because that makes him seem uncoordinated, but he's a big kid. He's a long athlete. I don't think he's twitchy in that way. So I think ultimately he's a guy that wants to push it down the field when he's playing at his best. We'll see what happens. My sense is, based on who they hired, who Nick Sirianni hired, particularly as his quarterback coach, Brian Johnson, came out of college. He's been with Dan Mullen, so he's been with Dak Prescott. He's been with those kinds of quarterbacks. I would think, and I'm just trying to read the tea leaves here, no inside info. I would think that they probably look at Jalen Hurts as their guy, and it would not surprise me if Carson Wentz was traded.
What happened to Carson Wentz?
I mean, I can only tell you what the film shows, but that's an organizational issue. You had a guy in 2017 that would have been the league MVP and was talked about as a top 3 quarterback in the league. As recently as 2 years ago, I had a GM tell me that Mahomes and Wentz were the 2 most talented quarterbacks in the league. Of course, this was before Josh became Josh, and I think he's actually the most physically gifted quarterback in the league right now. But the point is that Wentz has high-level physical traits, and somewhere along the line, something went wrong. I'm not in the building. I can only tell you what the film shows, that he didn't do well, but he's got high-level traits. So now it's up to someone to pull that out of him.
Yeah, and I just, the way I look at it, I'm just saying to myself, there's got to be somebody out. There will be more, probably be more than one offensive coordinator or head coach in the league with an ego big enough to say, I can fix him.
Well,
how tall a
a
task,
point,
though, do you think that is?
Because what do you do if you're a team, and let's say you have a higher draft choice, and Carson Wentz has played well in the league at a very high level. Now, he obviously didn't this past year, but it's there on tape. You've seen it. So what do? Do you say, okay, I'm going to draft Wilson from BYU, who's never played in the league, and we really have no idea what he is, or do you trade that pick for Carson Wentz? I think that's a very interesting organizational question.
Is it to the point now, though, and we've been having this conversation, this is above my pay grade. I'm just the Rams.
Well, mine too. Believe me, Steve, mine too.
Which is not going to stop us, though. The Rams virtually paid the Detroit Lions to take Jared Goff's contract. I mean, they gave him Goff and draft picks to get that contract off, and they got Matthew Stafford in return. Who do the Eagles have enough to pay somebody to take Carson Wentz's contract and everything that it is?
Yeah, that's that cap stuff. I don't know the answer to that, but
Right.
It's funny you mentioned the Goff Stafford trade, because I think that speaks to another league narrative now. The idea that a quarterback like Goff, who, by the way, has had success, you can line up and obviously win with Jared Goff. He got to a Super Bowl. But I'm just talking about stylistically, the kind of quarterback like Goff who really does not have second reaction ability. Is that quarterback, and it speaks to the Super Bowl as well with Brady versus Mahomes, is that kind of quarterback going to be seen now as a dinosaur in the NFL? And Goff's a young player, but is that style of quarterback a dinosaur? Or is everybody going to be looking for a quarterback that can make plays off script outside the structure of an offense because defenses are so good?
Yeah. It's a fascinating conversation.
Great,
I think
thanks.
it's going to lean towards the athletic guys, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the guys that are getting further and further in the playoffs, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes being 2 of the examples. Listen, Greg, it's been a blast having you on all season long. Thanks for coming on and making such strong contributions to the show. I know we'll reconnoiter with you in the very near future. So thanks for all the contributions this year.
Well, I loved it, guys. Thanks so much for having me.